Good morning, everyone, and also good afternoon and good evening to those of you who are joining us from different parts of the world. And thank you for joining us virtually at Dutch Design Week 2020. This is the first time that Dutch Design Week is happening completely virtually. And this is blockchain for designers and artisans, a live panel conversation featuring experts from different but highly interconnected fields. And our goal today is to have an in-depth conversation about both the promises and pitfalls of blockchain technology, with particular focus on the creative industries. And so through this conversation, we hope to bring some clarity to some of the ways that blockchain technology has been implemented so far, and also, keep our discussion as informative as possible for our audience, the majority of which we know are, designers, artists, and creative technologists, given the context of this panel. So, yeah, and in the last 9 months, we have witnessed, many changes and disruptions to our lives. And so, how has the pandemic, affected cryptocurrencies? What are some new opportunities also enabled by the blockchain technology that creative people can leverage? And also looking far into the future, what are some of the possible long-term implications of blockchain-based technologies? And how can we ensure that we all also have a say in this technology and how it gets developed further? So those are just some of the things that we will be discussing today. And now I would like to introduce the panelists. So we have with us Koray Çalışkan, who is Associate Professor of Strategic Design and Management at Parsons School of Design, Associate Editor of Journal of Economy. And Koray, do you mind saying a few things?
Yes. First, thank you very much for inviting me for this fantastic panel with wonderful people on board. We're going to learn a lot. I work on cryptocurrencies and blockchains and try to understand their social universe and how they work. I'm not looking at their history or emergence, or I'm not looking at their consequences, which are already very important areas of research on blockchains and cryptocurrencies. I look at how they work inside of it, how people understand, misunderstand what they do, what kind of design principles, and more importantly, on materiality of digital platforms, tangible and intangible materialities that I'm going to be able to talk a little bit today in relation to how designers, artisans, and artists, scientists can use them and understand them and welcome them in their professional practice.
Thank you, Koray. And next we have Jeffrey Geringer, who's an artist, designer, and theorist working at the bleeding edge of AI-generated sculpture and digifactoring.
Howdy, that's me. I'm an artist based here in Brooklyn currently. My background is primarily in digital manufacturing, or as I like to call it, digifactoring, because I am also a chronic Latin student. I have also become very enamored of machine-human collaboration in the form of AI tools for art making. I've done a lot of I guess theorizing on that topic, and so like the language one uses for that is very deliberate. This portrait, actually, you see here, is not real. That is a GAN picture of me. I created a custom data set using about 1,000 photographs of myself in various facial expressions and poses. So that picture is actually one of the least bizarre ones of that series. But it's sort of a commentary on the history of art, and also just the sort of like data set creation aspect of machine learning art. Other than that, I also have done a lot of work in the digital sculpture realm, sort of to Corey's point about like digital objects and materiality. I have a lot of experience with like 3D printing and that sort of thing as it relates to the possibilities or lack thereof of representing a digital object in the physical world. I'm interested in blockchain because it seems to be a technology with a lot of potential and a lot of maybe potential downsides, but also potential upsides, right? So yeah, I guess I am one of the aforementioned designers and artisans.
Thank you, Jeffrey. Next, we have June Ian Wong, who's a former journalist at CoinDesk and Quartz. June?
Hi there, my name is June. I'm based in London. I got into the cryptocurrency space as a journalist, which is really my background. So I was one of the first staff reporters at CoinDesk. CoinDesk is a website that covers what goes on day to day in the crypto space at coindesk.com. So I joined CoinDesk back in 2013 when really there was only one cryptocurrency. It was Bitcoin. I've sort of chronicled the ups and downs of that coin and the attendant industry around it for the last 7-8 years. In 2015, I started a conference at CoinDesk called Consensus, which has now become sort of the main, I guess, gathering point of the industry. It happens every year in New York City. Although this year we did a virtual edition, and we had over 20,000 people register for it, which sort of shows how the industry has sort of grown. The first edition of Consensus we did in 2015, we had 600 people. So it's always fascinating to see as the conference evolves, sort of the different companies that exhibit, the different people who show up. It seems to be an ever sort of expanding group of industries and executives and different folks who are interested in this technology. So I think that shows a little bit about the diversity of stakeholders that are interested in cryptocurrencies and blockchains. Today, I work on a few different projects. I think the most relevant one is probably my work in the area of sort of personal tokens or social tokens or community tokens, which are really crypto tokens that are issued by or associated with, in some cases, a single person. Like I have a token that is traded. There's a liquidity pool on Uniswap. You can trade my token for ETH. I think I was doing well, not me, the token was doing rather well in the last few weeks, but it's undergone something of a crash in the last 24 hours. Hopefully this conference appearance will prop the price back up. And I do some of that work as a researcher in residence at a company called Rally, which is a platform that helps creators of all types issue their own tokens. Additionally, I help a project called Seed Club, which is a sort of a community incubator for token issuers. So we try to help folks figure out, what are some good monetary policies for your personal token. We're running our first cohort right now, and we have a great group with us, including a musician named RAC, who is a Grammy-nominated musician who just released his own very interesting community token called RAC a few weeks ago. So really looking forward to chatting about some of those things with the panel.
Thank you, June. And next we have Jack Wilkinson. So Jack is a senior strategist at Jam3. He uses speculation, featuring, and design to empower imagination and explore what lies across the post-human horizon. Jack?
Hey y'all, Jack. Yep, as Baller said, I'm a senior strategist at Jam3, based out of Toronto. We're sort of an innovation agency, and we help brands do things at the really cutting edge of technology, as far as different things with augmented reality, VR, sort of like AI generated art, things like that. And then in my own personal practice, I'm really interested in speculative design. Went to Parsons as well, and then taught there for 2 years. Really interested in speculative design as a mechanism for asking questions about the things that we're designing. And I feel like blockchain is one of those ones where we particularly need to ask questions around the systems that we design, and create scenarios, and sort of play out ways in which certain systems could have different kinds of effects, because I feel like a lot of the blockchain is around, a lot of it is governance structure for how certain interactions are happening between people. Things like currencies create sort of entire protocols of interaction, and designing those systems before we actually physically design those systems, sort of imagining what those systems are, is super valuable for understanding the ramifications that they're going to have. One of the main things that I'm really involved in is I've been designing a game that helps people think about the future of how minds are designed. So how is AI and blockchain going to come together to design a new kind of way of thinking? And often we think about AI as being mostly around, we're mostly attempting to design a new human mind. And there's just so many other forms of intelligence that exist in the world, different kinds of distributed intelligences like slime molds that exist. And I think, different kinds of technical systems help us to imagine the ways in which we could develop different kinds of intelligent systems. So yeah, I'm super interested in having a conversation with everybody.
Thanks, Jack. And lastly, my name is Boller Hungalan. I'm a fashion design technologist and a creative strategist, also an interaction designer based at the New School. My research spans programmable matter, virtual materiality, and also craft preservation in virtual reality. And I'm really interested in how emerging technologies can be leveraged to preserve existing cultural artifacts and craft techniques in virtual reality, and perhaps even on the blockchain. And so today I'll also be talking briefly a little bit about my Apprenticeship 2.0 project, which uses hand gestures and sort of hand tracking to manipulate particle-based simulated craft materials in virtual reality. So with that said, I thought we could begin our conversation with a very simple question, but also a very loaded question. Why blockchain? And I think, we have been sort of like thrown around various different words like mining or proof of work, tokenization, and what do all these words mean, and also why are we discussing about the blockchain? Anybody wants to say anything to that?
I can start. Jack, were you going to say something? Did I?
No, I'm excited. I was going to say I'm excited for you to start.
Oh, okay. Thank you. I think in order to address the question, why blockchain, we need to understand what it is. Because a lot of people think that with blockchain, a new world emerged, a revolution happened, and it's completely new. This rupture talk should be a little bit distant from us. Blockchain is not something terribly new and terribly different, okay? it is actually an accounting system. It's very boring. It's very exciting too. We need accountants to register whatever we do in our lives economically, right? Imagine I send something, money, through a bank, it's digital money, to Bolor, and then the accountants take care of it. Writing down, in case there's a problem, we can check. Blockchain is doing the same thing without the need for an accountant, so that communities, groups can account for their relationships and register what's going on together and find a way to check the accuracy of this register. It empowers people as long as it is an open accounting system. It can be a closed accounting system too. You can define who can account for those relationships. We call them closed accounting blockchains. It can be a private blockchain or a public blockchain in the sense that anyone can transact in it, or only a certain group of people transact in it. For instance, the Facebook proposed to build a money, Libra, and then wanted it to be in a private blockchain where they are going to be accounting for whatever is going on, not us. So they said, use our money, but I'm going to decide how to account for it. So this is something that people should say no. Blockchain is important if you want to account for your relationships and then have a democratic way of keeping track of them. This is as simple as that. The technology is the tool of doing this. And as with all tools, they are only useful if you know what you're going to do with it. So that's why I believe, philosophically speaking, we need to understand what blockchain is. And then we have to decide whether we're going to use it, how we're going to use it, how open we're going to make it, and for what. For instance, if you are a union, a workers' union, and if you'd like to have a token, and if you want it to be accounted, you can just decide to have a closed accounting blockchain, preventing union members to account for it, or you can open it to everyone, including non-union members. So it's more about how communities, how groups, how people who engage in digital economization relationships want to account for those relations. That's what I see when I look at blockchains is this new principle of accounting.
Thank you, Koray. Yeah, and I think you mentioned on a really important point about blockchain, right? There's not a single type of blockchain. There's different types of blockchains, and they accomplish various different things and work with different stakeholders. Before I show a couple of examples of blockchain being used to achieve, sort of transparency, immutability, decentralization, and traceability, I wanted to ask if anybody else had something to add to what Koray just said about blockchain.
Yeah, I'll add something. I felt that it was interesting when you talked about how technology is inherently this tool, and it is around what you do with the tool. But I think there's a key component of blockchain is around sort of a mental model of what it is and what it allows for, that transforms how we think about how relationships can sort of exist in a distributed manner. And I think we often talk about technology and tools as being sort of like they don't come with a politics of their own. It's all around how you use them, right? But I think blockchain is one of those really like core examples that actually the technology itself and what it allows for is inherently political, in that it allows a distribution of interactions between people. And so when we say we want to have a banking system that is something that is centralized versus a banking system on the blockchain that is inherently decentralized, it is the technology that affords the ability for us to have a distributed system that has its own politics that exist. And the why in that case is, for me at times, is around a why of, I want a system that is more distributed, more transparent, more around these principles. It is the why of it is a seemingly very political why.
Mm-hmm. And so I think a really good example of why someone would need to use the blockchain is the idea of supply chain transparency specifically in the fashion industry, right? The fashion industry is so well known for how it exploits its workers and the pollution that it creates. The two examples that I wanted to bring up are Fuchsia Shoes, which is a sustainable footwear brand offering artisanal handicrafts originating from Pakistan. And they've partnered with Provenance and uses their software to allow their customers to verify product-specific supply chain information. The second example is Brilliant Earth, which is an ethical diamond jewelry company that has partnered with Everledger, which is a startup, a blockchain startup, to again provide a permanent digital record of some of Brilliant Earth's diamond jewelry. And so the record, the idea is that the record enables one to trace the diamond's origin, characteristics, and ownership. And so in both of these cases, we see this sort of detailed, immutable product information get permanently attached to the product itself. And this keeps the supply chain information transparent, so to speak, making it possible to assess the environmental impact of the product and also ensure that workers are getting compensated for their work fairly. I wanted to see if any of you have any thoughts on these kinds of uses of the blockchain technology.
I'll take a stab. So, one interesting thing in reporting on how the technology has evolved over the years is this sort of, I guess, bifurcation between sort of, in the early days, it was either Bitcoin or blockchain, and now it's sort of, crypto versus blockchain. And I guess the two different buckets are, on the one hand, sort of permissionless public blockchain cryptocurrencies, and then on the other hand, some enterprise implementation of some of those features, which typically are permissioned in some way. And I think, so those two camps basically have a huge tension, right? Each has big problems with the other. But as a reporter looking at both of these technologies as they evolved, I think it was interesting to try and find the merits in both. And I think on the enterprise side, what's interesting is, I recall I did a reporting trip to Beijing a few years ago when I was with Quartz. And on that same trip, I went to one of the world's largest Bitcoin mines at the time, mining farms, was responsible for, I can't remember the number now, maybe 15% of the hash rate at the time. Massive facility in Inner Mongolia, as well as I visited, at the time, Walmart had set up a new thing called the Food Safety Center in Beijing, which was where they were doing a lot of their blockchain food provenance work. So, it was kind of like both on the public side and the permission side. and both of those things made sense to me at the time, right? There were merits to both. I think, in particular in the context of food safety in China, because there were many food safety scandals and major problems with the food supply chain in China, like baby formula that was tampered with, causing injuries and deaths and so on. And so there was definitely a use case for a tamper-proof ledger that could provide consumers with some kind of provenance to look at. However, the big problem that was pointed out to me, both by the Walmart people and other analysts who I spoke to afterwards, was, you still fundamentally have this garbage in, garbage out problem, right? Which is when you're dealing with objects that are not blockchain native, like food shipments and supplies and so on, you have a lot of friction between recording the item correctly and then that data being handled and manipulated on the chain. And so introducing a blockchain doesn't really solve that garbage in, garbage out problem. Although it might solve some other issues with interoperability, letting various parties look at the data and access the data, but it doesn't necessarily solve the data entry and output problem. And so, that's sort of one of the limits, I think, of some of these permissioned systems.
Thanks, June. And so when we talk about the blockchain, there's the sort of Bitcoin blockchain, right? And it's for the Bitcoin cryptocurrency. And then we have other types of blockchain. Probably the most well-known is the Ethereum blockchain that functions as, like a way to keep track of smart contracts. Would you be able to perhaps sort of distinguish between the cryptocurrency and a smart contract for the audience?
Yeah, I can take a stab. I mean, I think so the Ethereum blockchain, what the Ethereum people wanted to do was they wanted to introduce some complex computational features that was secured by a blockchain, right? So the problem with Bitcoin, for example, is it's not there's very limited scripting that you can do on the Bitcoin code. And some may say by design, others may say in spite of people wanting to have more scripting, the community couldn't get to a consensus to change the code. In either case, Vitalik Buterin, who was an early Bitcoiner, then went off and started Ethereum with a bunch of people. And his original idea, or the original pitch, was, Ethereum is the world computer, right? And it's a world computer because it has a state machine, a virtual machine that is maintained across a distributed network of computers around the world, right? Presumably. So, so the thing that Ethereum can do is that it can perform various types of computations, and the way those computations are paid for is with a cryptocurrency. And on Ethereum, that cryptocurrency is called Ether. So you use Ether and the metaphor they use is gas, to pay gas to fuel various applications that exist on the Ethereum blockchain. So I guess you can think of that as the difference between a cryptocurrency and a smart contract.
Thanks for that, June. And next we have Super Rare, which is a market for single edition artworks, digital artworks that are tokenized. And I think the word tokenized is quite loaded as well. Like, what does it actually mean when you have when you create an artwork, right? Say it's a digital artwork, and you tokenize that digital art. What does that imply? And how does one, tokenize something? Anyone wants to take a stab at that?
I'll definitely talk about the art aspect, but I would actually love for someone to answer that first because I wonder the same thing. Corey, you're muted.
Thank you, Jeffrey. Perhaps for the people who are listening to us and do not understand what is a cryptocurrency or Bitcoin, we can start using an example. We use certain materialities and imagine value in them in order to exchange them. Paper money is a material thing, and then we write things on it, and then imagine and mobilize value, and then send it to someone else. Or metal money. The materiality of Bitcoin or those crypto tokens is data, but not a conceptual thing, not a symbol only, but we financialize the right to send data from one place to another privately in a public space. And you do it with a blockchain. So digital, why is it important to have a blockchain? Because paper money is very, very difficult to replicate. It's expensive and very risky, right? Metal money too. However, it's very easy to copy and paste, take a picture and send of a digital representation. What makes digital things unique is our accounting system that attaches ownership to a certain piece of data. So what we do is we financialize the right to send data very much like we financialize a paper materiality and metal things. So again, the main point about a token is that not what you represent, for without representation, we can't talk anyway. For metal and paper money are also representations that we imagine value in them, but how you account for those very easy to replicate things called digital and make them unique. That is what we managed to do around 10 years ago, 2008, with cryptography, blockchains. So now we can use a different kind of materiality, intangible materiality, to imagine, send, and receive things that we value. I believe this is the main thing that we're doing, and it's simple if we think about it as a materiality. It begins to sound complicated for people when a rupture talk tells us that before there were atoms and now there's bytes, kind of this rupture talk. Before everything was material, now everything is digital kind of material. Empirically, it is wrong to think that digital things are immaterial because they create intangible material orders that distribute rights, transact value, and create opportunity structures for actors in a variety of ways.
Yeah, that almost makes sense. I feel like right, as you're saying, like you have like you're using a digital thing as a material piece almost, and so well, we're looking at this website called Super Rare, where basically people have uploaded artwork that takes the form of an image, and that is it exists on the Ethereum blockchain, and they use that blockchain to designates this single, I believe it's a single copy of the image as the, like, sort of like a piece of material, as Corey was just saying. So you can buy this image of this hand with the jewel in the middle for, you know, whatever little tiny amount of Ethereum, Ether, I believe. And I guess that means that you then have, I'm still not clear, like if you then like are able to download this thing onto your computer and no one else can take it, or you can't send it to anyone because in order to send it, you would break the link that it has with its like verification tokenization identity, that sort of thing. This is really interesting to me because what I do is digital sculpture, and generally what I've done is take the materialization process literally from the standpoint of putting it into the physical world using digital manufacturing. But this is like keeping it digital while imparting a sort of material aspect to it. And that concept is also like quite central to the concept of artisanness. If you have a handmade clay pot, that a large part of the value in that is that it's handmade by one particular person at one particular time. And it seems to me that this is getting toward a digital method of implementing the same sort of principle.
Jeffrey, and so you touched on this idea of uniqueness, right? Uniqueness that results from encryption. We have sort of used encryption to make sure that there's only one single edition of this artwork. And then there's sort of uniqueness in the form of a handcrafted actual material object. And there's no sort of duplicate to it because there's only one of it. Jack, did you have something to say about that?
You know, I'm going to be the person who just proposes like weird thoughts of possible things that could exist here. But I guess the thing I was thinking about is tattoo artists right now, right? They often struggle with when they put a design on, say, Instagram, someone takes it and some other tattoo artist will go now tattoo that thing. And I'm wondering, is there, in the image itself, is there a way to tokenize the actual imagery itself in a way where it's then still registered, even if it's been tattooed on someone? Because the, like, within the image itself is the, or is it only the code is baked into the code of the image, right? I mean, I guess that's true.
That's really interesting. That reminds me of currency, right? Like how, getting back to the money topic, but in a different way, where like if you try to scan a dollar bill, like I think every single scanner that's sold like has built-in like software into the firmware that like prevents it from scanning properly, or maybe it's on the printer side, like you can't print a dollar bill, and like there's like certain like you know, basically like gates in the printer's firmware that will just flat out just not print anything that kind of mostly resembles a dollar. And it yeah, sorry, that's just what that reminded me of.
Yeah, no, interesting. Yeah.
I don't know from a technical standpoint if that is possible to implement in like, you know, an image of line work or just, you know, like an image on Instagram. It seems certainly not currently the case.
Yeah, I'm just proposing it as a thought experiment around a tattoo artist often will sell like 50 copies of something online, and that now gives you the right to go get it tattooed by anyone, so they don't have to do the tattooing. But in that act of, I've sold you the tattoo that I would otherwise give you, but if you don't live locally, so therefore you can buy just for $50 the sort of like the template here and go get it tattooed by a local artist. But even in that translation between this is that tattoo's design that I have bought, but I'm now getting a new artist to tattoo it for me, there's going to be a difference, right? And so now even all those things are, but to purchase the right for the tattoo on a blockchain, right? To trace it back to now I'm one of the 50 tattoos that exists as part of a contract that was allowed for me to get this.
Yeah, I'm going to give an example of this fun little toy I have here, which is a tokenized toy. So there's a little NFC chip in the foot, which links to an Ethereum a token on the Ethereum blockchain, and this is from a company called Crypto Kaiju, and I think this is like an edition of 20 or something. It's a rare thing, and there's a price for it. I don't know what the price is. You have to look it up.
It goes up.
But you know, so I don't think. So I think tokenization is like the attempt to solve to create digital scarcity, right? So I think, like, for example, the great thing that Bitcoin did was it basically created digital scarcity of this thing. And I think when people say they want to tokenize something, they basically mean we want to introduce some kind of digital scarcity to this class of objects. And I think it remains a problem, right? So I don't know the answer for super rare, but you know, let's think about, for example, the thing that made this a bit of a craze among collectibles, crypto kitties, right? Crypto kitties happened, I think, 2016 or 17. And they're, you know, digital cartoon cats that you can collect and you can play in a game. And the issue with that is the images. So while each kitty was a smart contract on the Ethereum blockchain, was a token on the Ethereum blockchain, the associated metadata, like the illustration and other things associated with it, were hosted by the company that came up with it, right? A company called Axiom Zen. And so, and of course, you know, even if that data was somehow baked into the Ethereum blockchain, you could still just screenshot it or take a photo of it. You could still reproduce that image in some way. And I guess the claim of the people who tokenize things is that, you know, there's an original and then there are copies, right? So it's not that you can prevent copying. Copying can still happen, but you can make some claim that there is an original that is different from the copies.
That's really interesting. Yeah, I mean, it's like I think a lot about this. Like for instance, if my thesis project were valuable, which is currently a theory, but it's a series of 4 digital files. Oh, that's not the same project, but sorry, but like it's like 4 3D mesh files, right? Now I myself have a 3D printer. I have a lot of experience 3D printing stuff. I made a series of 4 prints of these 4 files. I consider those to be like the single limited edition original physical manifestation of these pieces, right? But theoretically, I could give someone else the file. They could print it themselves in a different material, or the same material but in a different quality, or like whatever it is. So it's interesting to me that, like, because we're talking about digital files, you know, I guess I don't know enough about the technology to say, like, if you have an image and it is somehow one of these tokens, if that image can then be duplicated, but the token can't, right? That's the point. So that but that token points to like, does it point to one file in one hard drive somewhere, or does it point to like, this is what the original looked like? You know, like I still don't really quite understand that. Or is it like embedded in the file itself, like in the actual data of the file, that sort of thing. Yeah, I don't know. There's definitely a lot of analogies to me to like digital manufacturing, that sort of thing. But it's sort of like what Corey was saying. Like, it's hard to think about this without physical analogies.
There's another dimension of it. You know, sociologists who studied monies, like paper monies, like Viviana Zelizer, has showed that people who use them earmark them in certain ways that also attach personalized ways of relating to seemingly impersonal money. Digital things are not very different. They may look like they are the same, but it is us human actors that relate to them, identify with them, make them original so that we feel them to be original. Imagine a cassette of a song from ABBA from 1970s, right? It is the same song in every cassette. But my cassette is different than Jack's cassette because I, as an actor, attach meaning to it and see it not only as a tool, but also a thing that makes me, that has a agency. In this distributed agencies, I think it is us who create those values. That's why a token is also a material thing in a different kind of way. If I may give an example that Paul Dorish uses in his book, The Stuff About Bits. It's a fantastic book about the materiality of digital things. Roman numerals are 5 only, whereas Arabic numerals are 10. All numbers are can be written with those. However, if I ask you to write 1,766 with Roman numerals, it would take very, very long time for you to represent this materially. The difficulty shows us that they are not a mere symbol. They create material orders of doing things on the ground, but they are completely intangible. You can't touch this like this iPhone. That's why we earmark digital things too with blockchains. But this doesn't mean that once you have cryptocurrencies, you have blockchains, because there is a movement right now, centralized cryptocurrency markets are undermining blockchains. Plus, they help dollarization in the world, not taking away the power of dollar. Everyone is trading cryptocurrencies. They never register it on blockchains. So my research shows that the ratio of blockchain network registered cryptocurrency trade went down to 8% in average, all the way from 25%. So last year it was 14%. So they also work against each other. One shouldn't be thinking like, oh, because cryptocurrency, dollar is going to go. No, dollar is used in 30,000 more markets. This is how there are around 341 organized exchanges operating more than 30,000 markets today. So if we look at actual principles and practices, we see that there are also contradictory movements about blockchain. Just because we have cryptocurrencies doesn't mean that blockchains are getting more and more important, because organized markets are not registering and they're keeping regular accounting systems to account for cryptocurrency exchanges too. So the takeaway, these are material things. They create intangible orders, and just using them doesn't make blockchains more relevant, stronger, or popular. It can actually make them less popular if people use cryptocurrencies without blockchains.
Thanks, Koray. So we talked about attaching value to material and immaterial things, right? And how also there's really no way to to ensure that nobody's going to take a screenshot of a digital artwork. No, there's no sort of like technically viable way to prevent the duplication of an artwork in that sense. And I wonder, like, there's, what about the value that we attach to our own design process? Each designer, each craftsperson follows a very sort of personal, unique design process or creative process to get to some kind of output end result, right? Can that function as
you just muted yourself.
Can that function as a unique token of some kind? And I just have this example of Jeffrey's self-portrait. Jeffrey, would you mind explaining the process that you use to create these self-portraits, and what are we seeing right now?
Sure. So I guess this is an example of AI art. It's basically when I don't know, if you do a little bit of research into machine learning processes, you quickly find that almost more so than the machine learning itself is the sort of the key aspect of a lot of these technologies is the data set that it's being trained on. And so as an artist, I wanted to make sure that whenever I did any sort of AI art, I was using an ethically sourced data set. For this project, which I did recently, I actually commissioned a friend of ours who's a portrait photographer to take a series of over 1,000 photographs of me in various like facial expression poses. And I sort of like made a bunch of facial expressions and then actually multiplied them by 9 by doing different like angles like this, so that I could have as many pictures as possible of myself that are all similar but different because they're all different facial expressions and different angles. So it's kind of like this pseudo scientific approach to to making a data set. So what you're seeing here is as fine-grained of a video as you can possibly make of, again, training itself, which is basically an image generator AI algorithm. So it's competing. It's a technical thing, but it's two different neural networks. One is generating images, and the other is distinguishing them. So it's distinguishing whether the thing that gets generated is real or fake. And in the process of doing so, it's able to determine, or it's able to get better at both sides of it. And eventually the generator gets extremely good at fooling the discriminator, and that there's like certain technical benchmarks for like, when is this done? Like, is it completed training or whatever? So basically this is a video I made of again, training on 1,000 images of me in different but similar-ish facial expressions. And I've never seen a video quite like this. It's very high resolution. If you, this looks a little bit compressed, but basically the point is that this is, whenever you do this sort of work, it's running on your computer for a period of days. That particular run is unique. If I did this exact same thing again, using the exact same data set, the same settings on the machine learning stuff, it would do something a little bit different. And the things that it does are definitely not predictable. Like if you look at this currently, you can sort of see the shape of my head now and like the color of my hair and stuff, but it has all this weird like purple stuff that's like kind of like floating around and like doing weird things. I don't know. It's just this strange thing. So I guess back to what we were just talking about, like it seems to me that if you're an AI artist, you could use something like a tokenization process to say, this particular piece of AI art is was generated from this one particular run on my GAN or whatever it is that occurred on this date at this time, and it's very much it's analogous to something like a signature on a painting or a certificate from an art gallery saying this thing is genuine, kind of thing. Whereas each the interesting thing about AI art is that the process of doing it is different given the same parameters. Like it doesn't have a linear process for outputting stuff.
It's a bit like a solo-wit, right? Where it's like you're giving the instructions for how to make it. Jeffrey's like, no, don't.
Something like that. Yeah, I have personal problems with solo-wit, but that's okay. It's a good example. So solo-wit's extremely important.
Yeah. Art by instructions, maybe. We don't need to.
Yeah, it's
one person owns a type of art.
Right. It's interesting because it's parameter. It's like yeah. They have things to do with parameter spaces.
Thanks for sharing that, Jeffrey. So talking about materiality and different types of value systems, I wanted to also hear what you guys think about these sort of more intangible value systems that we have. Things like cultural, culturally significant, like passed down knowledge, that perhaps materializes in the form of a physical object, but really it's sort of the skill and knowledge of creating an artifact or sort of being able to tie a knot in a very specific way that is that's very unique. How can we how can we also involve these topics around about intangible cultural traditional values, and then talk about these things in relation to the blockchain. And I wanted to bring up this example, which is a project I've been working on for over a year now. And the core idea of this project in the beginning was to try to simulate traditional craft techniques in virtual reality. So how can we sort of bring in the materialities of manipulating a rope or a yarn material into VR, and how can we design more embodied interactions with these virtual materials in VR? And in the process, can we try to also preserve some of these traditional craft skills? Because believe it or not, there's actually a Heritage Crafts Association that keeps track of craft techniques that are considered endangered. And there's even a list of craft techniques that are now extinct. So could we somehow bring this type of discussion to our discussion of blockchain and think about how we could help preserve these very intangible values? Can we transact with these cultural values? This is kind of entering speculative arena, but yeah, what do you all think about this?
This is a very interesting and difficult question, what you're asking, Olor. What comes to my mind is to think about these relations not as existence, non-existence, or that you can touch, that you can't touch, material, immaterial, is a process of realization. And in the process of realization, in the modern era that we are in right now, we use different forms of performativity. And we realize with forms of performativity. If I may give you an example, Black and Scholes formula, economists, right, write formulas to understand markets, and these markets begin to work with reference to those formulas later. So they refuse that, of course. They don't say that, yeah, we're building markets, but they say they create condition of possibility of what they observe. This relationship, this creative relationship, is about a distributed agency that is joining to the creation process or the realization process. And if you think about the term verb realize, you make it real, you understand its reality and how it works. You also financialize when you realize an interest rate, when you realize a bond. So in this process, perhaps if we see it not as a representation only, but thinking the productive capacity of representations, then the problem is not solved, but becomes more manageable in specific cases of realization. Then we can think about what tools of performativity do we have. Think about microeconomics. Microeconomics works on markets with something called supply and demand graphs, and this is how they represent it. It's a designed intervention to show the undesigned nature of markets, because for them, they come from our human nature of a propensity to barter, truck, and exchange. It just happens. You leave people, markets work by themselves kind of idea. How do they do it? By using a picture, a simple picture. They claim to be scientists, but they drove on a design intervention to show what they do. So these are already being done. It is not a revolution happening and we're going to do something new. We may be realizing that with these new materialities, the spectrum of choices is enlarged. For instance, we can now divide the ownership of things, imagine a materiality in it, and then exchange, such as you showed a wonderful visualization right now. What if I wanna own like 10% of it and have it registered on me? Previously, this was not possible, but now artists can transact ownerships or right to use, different forms of barter, an interesting modality of rent, and economize within a larger spectrum. And this already started. Think about Facebook uses the oldest economization model in human history, which is barter. It gives me the chance to send a funny cat picture to my grandma, and then my grandma gets it, and then Facebook gets our attention, then financializes it somewhere else. This is a barter economy, right? So this is already happening. And I believe with blockchains and tokenization, the opportunity structure for actors in spaces of economization enlarged and now taking place in stacked ways. Thus, depending on the actor, we can use it in different ways. For instance, if I am a restaurant owner on a train car, train is an infrastructure for me. Whereas for the Amtrak train company, railway is the infrastructure. So it is already, it was stacked, but in a limited way. Life is stacked in a limited way. With digitalization, with this new kind of materiality, we see such an opening. And I believe what Jack does, instead of studying like what is. I study what is. Jack studies what if, right? I believe this is also performative of what is, and will be more so in the future.
So you're describing core as specific relationships, right? And this reminds me of June's social token idea, the idea of tokenizing the relationship between, for example, a creator and their followers or their audience, their readers. June, would you mind talking a little bit about that? Perhaps?
Which is actually, June is showing us how such economization tools are deployed on the ground in a violently creative way, fantastic way.
I can attest to the violence of it, for sure. I mean, someone just dumped my token for 1 ETH. Horrible. Yeah, so this idea of sort of personal tokens and so on, you know, it's one of a number of sort of parallel trends, I think, in the sort of the media space, right? People are talking about, oh, you know, creators are really at the mercy of platforms, right? And people think about Instagram or YouTube or TikTok and things like that. So how can creators have more autonomy and be less beholden to platforms when it comes to their revenue streams and even their choices of what they can publish and broadcast. So there's a stream of thought in sort of the media and publishing space about creators owning their content and owning their communities. And then in the crypto space, there's this movement of tokenizing yourself and tokenizing the sort of the relationships between a creator and their fans. And then additionally of sort of capturing in a token the relationship between fans, right? And so I think, you know, I've been delving a bit into the literature around things like immaterial labor, fan labor, and also some of the work in sociology and anthropology around community and local currencies. And I think it's a kind of an example of fan labor leading to a local currency that sort of captures those social ties in that community. And so, you know, a sort of a tangential example might be the recent IPO of the agency that represents the K-pop group BTS, right? So they went public recently, I think a few weeks ago on the Korean Stock Exchange, and media reports said, you know, it was 1,000 times oversubscribed with institutional investors wanting to get in. And the stated reason for this popularity was, well, you know, BTS has such a powerful rabid fan base, and they call themselves ARMY, right? And they are a globally distributed bunch of people who coordinate on the internet and do all sorts of things. They spend their money together or take coordinated action to create various effects, like, for example, spamming one of Donald Trump's rally appearances and causing the tickets to be sold out and him to have an empty arena. So anyway, I think that's a kind of a tangential thing where, you know, you see some of this financialization happening and people trying to get exposure to this kind of community asset that creators have.
Thanks, June. And I would like to spend the next 10 or so minutes speculating about sort of possibilities with the blockchain. We have here this Futures by Design, Speculative Design Framework by Jack Wilkinson. And I wanted to ask you, Jack, about how sort of speculation works when it comes to these sort of breakthrough innovative technologies like blockchain. How do creatives like designers and artists how can we leverage the different sort of design processes and methodologies that we have as our tool set to speculate about possible implications and come up with maybe different applications. Would you mind explaining what we are looking at right now?
Sure. I actually think it starts something that Corey said just a few minutes ago, which was around that relationship between what if and what is. There's a constant cycle between that conversation happening within design practice and just in the world in general, that the things, we make things, we ask questions about those things, we propose things that could exist, we make new things, those new things redefine our existence as humans and our ability to make new kinds of things. And we go back in a constant ontological design loop around being shaped by the things we make and shaping the things that we make. Speculative design is an attempt, I think, at sometimes just like getting like one or two like paces, just steps ahead of that loop, and trying to just get to this place where we can maybe have more of a conversation around, are the things that we creating the ways we want to be in the world. And this is actually the first time that this framework's been publicly put up at all. I've been working on it for a number of months now. And it is an attempt at taking the sort of what often feels like just sort of an ephemeral process, or an attempt at just like, oh, I see a thing in the world and I'm going to make something, and trying to give some real grounded steps to how that process actually happens. And one of those things, and a lot of what we're hearing is around, and what you're looking at is the numbers are the linear way you could do this, but we know that design is often nonlinear, and so the dotted line is, you know, you can kind of find your own path in this. But what you're really moving through is a couple of different mindsets: one around speculating, one around designing, one around experiencing that design, and one around just strategizing a new path forward. And those steps then become sort of more granular around, you know, signals of the future, things that we see that could happen. So just a moment ago, I was thinking about this way, and we were talking around the way in which we have images that are now sort of able to be first like owned, or like even the digital process of the creation of a piece of art that can now be registered on a blockchain. And we can now sort of begin to speculate, well, if that is the case, then what could that possibly mean? What kind of world exists now? And as we move towards step 2, we begin to sort of build out the kind of different ramifications of that kind of world. We can move to this step 2 and build out sort of like a world vision of what that could be. And then we can begin to move towards step 3, where after we've designed that world and we can sort of touch and feel. And I would almost propose that we almost in our own minds, we go to that world. We are now walking around in that world, and we're now beginning to prototype new kinds of things that could exist from that world. And we bring them back into the present, the now, in order to experience them together, in order to say, okay, in a future world, if something could exist that's like this, I've made a prototype version of that thing. Is this a thing that we actually want to exist? And let's consider those consequences of that thing being, of the thing that I have now in my hand, that I have built, that lets us have that conversation. And then we can strategize plans forward around, how do we avoid the consequences of that? Or how do we, backcast towards a scenario, towards a future that we want to exist? And then we can begin again, where we've now made a thing that we decided we really like. And that becomes a new signal for a new kind of world that exists. And we can begin a new process of creating a new kind of world. And it allows us to continue to evolve the things that we put in the world that we want to have conversations about before we have to deal with their ramifications. And we can have a conversation about their ramifications in order to continue to evolve the things that we make. This is where my head's at as far as the practice of speculative design right now, and how I've been thinking about it recently, as sort of this like ontological cycle with a number of mindsets that we work through in order to design a better world.
Yeah, and this is fascinating, right? Because now I want to ask, do we want a world with where there is trust-free money, and sort of like the way we transact, the thing we use to transact with each other is this sort of trust-free money. What does that imply?
Yeah, I think that's a super exciting question, and something that, and I really want to hear everyone else's opinion, but I really want to highlight for designers and artists that are watching, it's like they have an opportunity to ask that question and explore the ramifications of it without having to be an expert in blockchain. You can make and create things that explore that question and what it could be without having to physically build a blockchain. And yeah, but I would love to hear from others on that question for sure, and the consequences of it.
For a number of philosophers who work on money, money is a claim to society. It is not just a tool, as Jack and Jeffrey showed us, as June actually is creating now. I just checked his token. It's really lovely. But because I do research about cryptocurrencies, I can't buy and sell and trade. I only do it for register. I have to register it and then account for my touch of cryptocurrencies because I'm writing an ethnography about them. So I couldn't buy. I'm sorry, June, but I would definitely buy and sell. We are seeing a new mode of this economization, which happened before. Interestingly, this is sometimes called metaphysics of modernity by people like Timothy Mitchell, who wrote a fantastic history of Egypt's colonization. I don't think any consideration of justice, when it touches forms of economies, can materialize, can be realized without imagining its own money. So if people can't make an account for monies they use, these people will be used by other actors. That's why imagining and making monies is very important, and earmarking money itself is one of the most important ways of empowering yourself, such as in very patriarchal societies where where women cannot touch money, cannot own money, and enter in economic relationships. They try to earmark value in gold in order to keep men away from them, because men wants to take everything from women, as you know. So how do they do this? They monetize gold and culturally earmark it by saying that this is my bridal money, this is the gold of the woman, so you can't touch. And man has to negotiate that space of power by monetizing, by earmarking monies and tokens. Now, we're doing a very similar thing with blockchains and cryptocurrencies. And I believe any concern about addressing geographies of injustice when it comes to economization should start with imagining your money and using it and making it and account for it. We can't have a world while at the same time people who ask for economic inequality keep using some other people's monies that are created by other people. It's a claim to society, as Georg Simmel would say.
Damn, that reminds me of the mortgage crisis.
Thanks, Koray, and thanks, Jeffrey, and thanks, June and Jack, So I think we are running out of time now, and I wanted to just ask if anybody has any last minute statements that they would like to make, anything, anything that they would like to add to the conversation that we had, and then we'll end it.
I'm going to go sharp at 12:30. I have a hard stop. I want to thank 35 people who are watching us and listening to us. They can reach me on my email. And I learned a lot from June, Jeffrey, Jack, and Bolor. Thanks for inviting me. That's fantastic.
Thank you for joining us, Koray.
Cheers. Yeah, I guess I would add that just to summarize, I think the fundamental point that I have gleaned is that the thing that blockchain does is that it allows people on the ground to cut out the middleman in transactions, and that can be extremely profound. It can be extremely mundane, but I think that that's sort of like for me the key takeaway, and that's an interesting concept, especially for me as an artist when it comes to the gallery system.
I'll jump in here. I say this was a super interesting conversation. I too have learned a lot from this great group. Super interested to read your paper, Koray. And I think I just want to echo, I think, your sentiment. Yeah, as Zimel says, right? It's money is a claim to society, and I think the opportunity with this diversity of monies that Bitcoin has sort of helped to promote or publicize is precisely the sort of experimentation that we're all doing with personal tokens and community tokens and so on. I think I'm reading a great book by an anthropologist named Keith Hart now called Memory Bank, in which he talks about, and this is written 20 years ago, he talks about how telecommunications might allow these kinds of local monies to finally gain some traction. And so, maybe this is it. This is the moment that we're at, and telecommunication has met cryptography, and this is the experiment we're running.
And June, you should write about this experience. If I were, I definitely, we should read your experience on it.
I am writing about this for my rally gig, so I'll send you a link to my column, which I call Pace Notes. I also tweet a lot about the emotional travails of my token, so you can follow me on Twitter at JuneIan.
It also sounds like an art project to my ears.
Yeah, that's what I would say, is that it feels very well. One thing is around just, I'm excited that we got to have this conversation today a lot, because it feels like we did was sort of that step 4 and 5 here around, we looked at a lot of examples of something and we considered sort of what they mean. And there's like, I love that June keeps referring to this as like very much an experiment, right? Like there's so many experiments out there right now that we need to, that more people need to continue to make, and we need to continue to observe and be both artists and anthropologists at the same time, putting things into the world and sort of bearing witness to the ways in which the things that they cause to happen. And yeah, I'm excited for where this all heads, and it's been a wonderful conversation.
Thank you, everyone, for bringing all your diverse perspectives into this. And to those of you who are listening or watching, thank you for spending the last 1.5 hours with us. And if anybody wants to reach out to the panelists, please go onto our event page on the Dutch Design Week website. You'll be able to find their LinkedIn profile page or Twitter page or website link there. And yeah, I'd just like to say thank you one more time to the panelists as well for joining us. And we will end it there.
Thank you, Bowler.
Yeah, thank you
for organizing, Bowler and Jeffrey. See you guys.
Cheers.
Bye.
Bye.
See ya.